Hello and welcome everyone. We have all our speakers and the panelists for today on the webinar. Can one of the speakers just confirm if I'm audible?
Yes, Ranjit, you're audible. Srikanth here.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks a lot, Srikanth.
Yes,
So
you're
welcome
audible.
everyone. Thank you. Thanks a lot, sir. So again, welcome everyone. Thanks a lot for joining us today for this webinar. As you would be aware that in the wake of the pandemic that we are presently facing, the uptake of digital payments in particular has been exponential, if one could put it that way. And with that particular uptake, what we have seen is that the security concerns around these particular payments have also increased, and they have caught the attention not just of the users but of the sector regulators as well. And towards this end, in February, the Reserve Bank of India also issued a master directive on the payment security controls. And it has been a widely discussed regulation in the industry. And we have been talking with stakeholders, talking with industry experts as to how we can take this to the people at large, how this can be explained, how this can become a part of a discourse at large in the ecosystem. So towards this end, we partnered and collaborating with the FIDO Alliance. Thanks to Shankar for also initiating this whole process. And we are starting off with a webinar series that looks to sort of unravel the new directive and see how it can be adopted by the industry, and the objective of making digital payments more secure taken up. Towards this end, we have today on the panel industry veterans like Dr. Sandeep Oberoi. We have David Turner from the FIDO Alliance, and we have Srikanth, who is an industry practitioner. And I will give a formal introduction of them during the course of this session. So with all the speakers on the ready and ready to begin, what I will do now is I will start off the session. So today's session, we will start with Dr. Sandeep Oberoi. Dr. Sandeep Oberoi, who was the former global head for the TCS cybersecurity practice. He brings to the table a wealth of experience in research, entrepreneurial endeavors, and cybersecurity. And not just on the business side, but he has also been engaged in the standard development side. He heads important committees and is involved in a lot of standardization activities across the board, and most of us are aware of him as an as an industry expert. So without further ado, and without eating into the experts' time, I will now request Dr. Oberoi to initiate this particular session. Sir, the stage is yours, and you have around 10 to 12 minutes to continue with this particular session. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Ranjit, and thank you everybody for making your time available and attending this webinar. I know that everybody has busy schedules, and let me again express my appreciation to all of you to make your time available and listen to these deliberations. So, Ranjit, am I clearly audible?
Yes, sir, you are.
Okay. So, the topic today is authentication of digital payments and alternatives to SMS. And see, there is no doubt that SMS has some compelling benefits. And that is the reason for its tremendous deployment as an authentication method, not only for digital payments, but for all kinds of services. Everybody has started using OTPs as a basic security mechanism. And it does have some compelling benefits, there's no doubt about that. I think the most compelling benefit of an SMS is that for an application provider, or a person who is a user of those services, there is no provisioning effort and cost. That has been, the provisioning effort and cost, has been borne between the subscriber and the telco that has issued that SIM card, and it has been amortized over. So it's a very easy thing to do. It exists, and the provisioning costs are very low. And it's the convenience that it delivers is borne out by its adoption. Yeah. So there's no doubt it's convenient. And today, the fact of the matter is that mobile penetration is so extensive that it does cover considerable amount of the population. Okay? And there are some, segments that are excluded and so on, but this is a very large coverage. It's very convenient to do, and consequently it has been adopted. But there have been some changes in the deployment scenario since we first began to use some form of ATP. Okay. In the older days, where the phones did not necessarily, have too many capabilities. They were really feature phones, and most of your application interaction was done on a laptop or a desktop. Yeah? There were clearly two separate channels. The channel over which the authenticator came to you, okay, and the channel through which you interacted with your application. Absolutely separate. Okay? But there are technology trends today where this separation is not necessarily that clear. Okay? On the mobile, you just have, in fact, one channel, and most of the SMS authentication for device, etc., the applications themselves access the SMS API. So you just click, it says, I'm sending you an OTP. The app, is able to read the OTP, and you're done. Yeah. But there is a tension between convenience and security, right? If that were not there, yeah, then if you had, let us say, a first class ticket or a business class ticket, I am sorry to remind everybody of the days where we could travel easily. Okay, but at least to lighten the mood and make people a little happy. If you remember those days, what is to stop somebody with a first class ticket being directly driven to the aircraft? Nothing. Yes. It's just that you now have to frisk this person, send them through metal detector, etc. Yeah. So security slows things down. It's inconvenient, and there is a tension between usability, convenience, and security. Yeah. And the more convenient you make things, the risk is that it is becoming slightly becoming insecure. Yeah? So today, if you look at it, that strict separation of the two channels is getting blurred. And even if you look at the evolution of telecom, at the back end, 4G is just an IP network. And if you look at 5G, so this separateness of channel is just going to be an illusion. Right? So while it's convenient to use SMS, it's becoming less secure. The second thing is this issue of provision. Okay, if I don't provision, I don't authenticate the SIM. You do a KYC. You're very rigorous in the banking industry doing KYC. Who am I? Yeah, PAN card, Aadhaar, etc. But I accept any number that I put as my mobile number. So that's not validated. That leads to its own kinds of risks. And finally, this is merely a method in a sense, authentication. There is no benefit that the transaction derives in terms of protection. So let's say I authenticate something, but I know banks won't do this, but hypothetically, let's look at bad bank who actually says I received the OTP, sent to the OTP, and changes the amount. Where is the protection against that? It turns out that we do have technologies and we do have enabling legislation that allows you to do this. And in fact, in many cases, this method of digital signature is already in use for certain categories and classes of transactions. So it has to be admitted that the protection must take into account the quantum of money that's being protected. So there are techniques. They are techniques that are in a position to deliver some sort of transaction integrity protection as well. Right? And on this topic, yes, every technology is breachable. Okay, let's say you had malware that showed you something but made you sign something else. That could happen in an SMS also, right? But once you've protected a message, it is subsequently not possible to change it. So if you did have a system where you got a receipt and the receipt was also duly countersigned, you would have better integrity protection. Yeah? So I'm just, I am conscious of the fact that I've taken up my time. SMS is convenient to do, okay, but because of the factors that I spoke about, it's becoming less secure. And there are alternative technologies that have the promise of giving you more than just authentication. And we have enabling legislation, and maybe it's time for us to seriously look at some of those alternative technologies. So back to you, Manat, and
thanks a lot, Dr. Barai. That was a very good, I would say, setting up the stage for what is coming next in terms of the session. And I'm sure the participants would also have got thinking about how we can, the point that you mentioned about the tension between convenience and security is I think what should get us thinking. And with that, what I will do, Dr. Oberoi, is I will now ask David from the FIDO Alliance to start his part of the discussion. So, David, I believe that you have a slide deck that you would be presenting.
That's correct.
Right.
If you let me share.
Sure, you can pull it up. I will just be assigning you the privileges. Just give me a couple of seconds for that. There you go. You should be able to present now.
And which one do I want? I want a screen. Just make sure I get the right screen. Just 1 second. Sure it's that one. There we go. Excellent.
We can see your screen, David. You can start.
Good.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, thank you everyone for having me. I appreciate it, and I appreciate you coming out to listen to the presentation. I hope the information I'll be giving will be of some use to you. So a quick introduction before getting into specifically how FIDO works. Not going to spend a lot of time going through this, but I think probably most people are already aware of the challenges we face, as we just discussed, between usability and security. Traditionally, we have passwords, usability is not great, and the security is not very good either. As time progressed, we went to other technologies. People were carrying around little dongles where they had to type in numbers for one-time passwords, and those were certainly stronger, but security-wise, but the usability was a lot worse. SMS, of course, improved the usability dramatically, improved the security somewhat, but again, it turns out that there's a bunch of weaknesses associated with that as well. So the FIDO Alliance set out to solve this problem by coming up with some open standards that enabled you to have stronger authentication using public key cryptography and allowed you to authenticate using a single gesture with a possession-based authentication token. So there are a set of threats that we were looking at when we were figuring out how to address the problem. Number one at the bottom, this is the threats to the servers themselves. In general, we would say that's not in scope, except for the fact that we now know that most attacks on servers these days start with some kind of authentication violation. Somebody's password's been stolen, somebody's account's been compromised. So to a certain extent, it does still apply. What we then have are the scalable attacks. These are the remote attack of a user's device, a user's service. They steal credentials to use them elsewhere. And the thefts can happen man in the middle. They can be spyware. It can be a phishing attack. And then lastly, you've got the physical attacks on the devices themselves. Somebody actually has your phone or your laptop in their hands. And that represents a very different kind of threat when somebody can physically touch your hardware, your machine. So where FIDO is focused is really on that large scale set of attacks, that very, very large surface of where all users are at risk if they don't take the right precautions. So I'm going to walk through now what FIDO looks like. And I'll start by first reviewing again, how do you do authentication today? Well, traditionally, a user enters some kind of credential, a password into a device. It gets then passed over the air to a server that does the authentication. Problem, of course, is for that kind of model with a shared secret, those passwords are now stored on the server. Server gets hacked, your passwords and your accounts are compromised. Secondly, the process of entering the password onto the device in the first place creates a series of threats because you've got phishing, you've got man-in-the-middle attacks, and again, you can have spyware and so on the machine capturing that information. And by the way, the phishing and man-in-the-middle apply to SMS as well, which is why SMS, while convenient, is still not, doesn't provide the best level of security. Then you've got the problem, of course, of trying to remember passwords. And as Sandeep said a few minutes ago, there's a close relationship between security and usability. And the problem is that to make things more usable for end users, they undermine their own security. They reuse passwords, they use easy to remember passwords and so on, which all takes away from the level of security of a given account. And then these days, with everyone doing everything on phones, the problem is made worse because typing in a password, especially a complicated one with weird characters and such, is even a bigger pain. And so again, people compromise the security by taking shortcuts and so on with their passwords. So FIDO fundamentally changes that model. And instead, what happens with FIDO is instead of having the device, your phone or your computer as being the piece in between the user and the service you're trying to authenticate with, we have a thing called an authenticator. And this is a piece of hardware that gets registered with the service that you're communicating with. And so once that service has been registered, then when a user wants to authenticate, they simply interact with the authenticator. And when I say interact, it could be that it's just a gesture to touch the device, or it could be a biometric input, a fingerprint, retinal scan. It can also be a PIN based on some devices. But again, that would be a secured PIN typically. And when you do that to the authenticator, what happens is that it unlocks the authenticator so that it can sign a challenge that comes from the service. And because the registration's already been done, the service owns the public key that corresponds to the private key in your authenticator. And this allows it to do a comparison and know that the key came from the authenticator that belongs to you and that was already registered with the service. So in this model, there's no secret stored on the server anymore. There's a public key, but if the server gets hacked, it's useless. Maybe it's useless. The user can't be tricked into phishing attacks because, and it prevents against man-in-the-middle attacks as well, because the authenticator when you register, binds the user and the authenticator to the domain of the service that you're using. So a phishing attack uses a different domain. Man in the middle uses different domains to try and redirect you. Well, the authenticator won't recognize the domain and therefore won't do the authentication. So it blocks that kind of attack from happening and protects the user. From a usability standpoint, there's nothing to remember. It's a very easy and frictionless process. Generally just takes a single gesture from the user and you're in. So we've gone from the complexity of remembering passwords, the risks of passwords being on the server and stolen off the server, to man-in-the-middle attacks and the like, to now a very simple, easy model where you touch your authenticator and you're logged in quickly, easily, and with a much better level of secure protection. Now, authenticators come in a couple of different forms. There's what's called a platform authenticator, which is when the authentication hardware is actually built into the device. And I'm happy to say that this is now the case on all modern devices. It's available on Apple, it's available on Android devices, and it's available on Windows. So pretty much every phone or every laptop that you buy today has the ability to become a FIDO authenticator so that you can set up that secure connection with your service provider. And what that means then is that that particular machine will automatically be able to log you in without you having to remember and enter your passwords all the time. But there's other models where you may need to take your credentials from machine to machine. You may log in on different devices. You may be working in an environment where you share machines. And so what you need is to be able to carry that authenticator with you. And in those cases, we have what are called roaming authenticators. And they're typically some kind of USB or NFC or even a Bluetooth type of device that depends on the proximity of the device as a way of confirming that it's really you that's using it. And it's also, in some scenarios, possible to use your phone as a means to authenticate to what's going on your laptop. So in addition to those two different models, there's also a variety of modalities that can be used. In some cases, I mentioned earlier, it may just be a simple gesture like touching the device to let it know that you're there. So it's a presence check, or it can have a higher level of requirement by using a fingerprint reader, or on my particular laptop, it's a Surface running Windows, and it uses Windows Hello. So when I open up my machine, if I want to log into, say, the FIDO member site, it recognizes me and logs me in directly. I don't ever have to type my password anymore. Very easy. Quick touch on biometrics aspect of this. Oh, and pardon me, I realized I forgot a very important point. The private keys used to establish the security mechanism with the relying party or the service are always stored in hardware on the device. They never leave the device. So the private keys are protected by the hardware of the device, whether it's on your laptop or whether it's a roaming authenticator that you can carry in your hand. Those keys, those private keys, never leave the device. Similarly, if somebody is using a biometric authenticator or biometric reader with an authenticator, if to pass the FIDO certified biometric certification, there's an additional requirement that the biometric processing unit must be embedded in the hardware such that the biometric information can never leave the device. So it adds an extra level of privacy as well as security, knowing that the biometrics templates and so on can't be stolen off the device and reused elsewhere. As I mentioned earlier, we know that the platform authenticators are now available across all the major hardware environments, but it's also across all the major browsers. So FIDO is now available across, as I said, the Windows, all Android devices on both Mac OS and iOS, and it's supported in all of the major browsers. So I think somebody calculated recently that means that FIDO is currently stored pardon me, supported in somewhere in the order of 4 billion devices worldwide, which is pretty ubiquitous. So just in summary, key aspects of FIDO is it's much stronger. Public key cryptography instead of passwords, never leaves the device, no server-side shared secrets. Biometrics never leave the device. And another aspect I didn't mention is that there's no linkability between accounts, because when you register your authenticator with each service, it generates a unique set of keys in each case, so that you can never, one party could never know that you're using the same authenticator with another site, or know that it's the same user going to different sites. And lastly, it's very easy, works across all platforms, simplifies the model dramatically, single gesture to log on. It's a much friendlier approach to authentication than pretty much any other alternatives we have today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, David. Very insightful session indeed. Must say that you did touch upon a lot of interesting aspects in the short and limited time that you had. So thank you for that. And I think the next logical step, as would be planned for this particular session, would be to now listen from somebody who has actually implemented this in a business environment. So towards that effort, David, I will now request you to mute yourself, and I will unmute Srikanth. Srikanth, who is presently the Executive Vice President for Technology at Bharat Financial Inclusion Limited, brings to the table about around 2 decades of experience as a technology executive, and his primary contribution that we are expecting from him today would be to tell us about the integration of the FIDO systems in their business environment. David, may I also request you to stop sharing the screen so that I can pull up Srikanth's
I have stopped sharing.
Okay, let me just pull up Srikanth's screen. Just give me a couple of seconds here. Srikanth, your PPT should now be up.
Okay.
Just yes. So Srikanth, the stage is yours, and just let me know when I should switch on to the next slide.
Yeah, you can move on to the next slide.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Over.
Yeah, thank you, Ranjit. Thanks for inviting BFIL to share its experiences on FIDO integration and benefits what we've been through with this implementation and integration. So I remember around 2 years back, when business came to us, the IT team as such, that to design a workflow for one of its mobile application, the requirement was for a BYOD strategy. The requirement talks more about bring your own device, where my consumer bring his own device and we install our application in that particular device. So it's a very simple, straightforward requirement, and but the challenge was, there are 3 layers of challenges. One is the device doesn't belong to me, but I have to install my application. 2 is I need to introduce a multi-factor authentication to ensure that my data is protected and device also is protected in a way that it's not compromised. 3 is the support the kind of support I have to give for my consumer to ensure that particular transaction runs with a proper integrity and in a very secure way. So this was a straightforward requirement, as such, how do we design or connect all these dots, to ensure that we have an end-to-end transaction happens in a very secure manner on a alien device running on my application. So the solution 2 years back, how we defined was a multi-factor architecture, where we thought of introducing a different factors, ensuring that the authentication happens in a right way. To that particular business case, there is an extension to that, challenging IT in terms of, for that particular mobile device, a different peripherals also will be connected. That could be a biometric device, or could be a Bluetooth drivers, or Bluetooth printers, or Wi-Fi connectors. So the case is all about converting that particular mobile into a mini, POS or mini ATM or mini bank kind of a thing. So yes, we designed a multi-factor where I would say the combinations of, a 3-layer of authentication. One is, the first is, I would say, OTP, a standard way of inviting a OTP. And once you do the verification on the OTP, then we take him to the Aadhaar. Aadhaar is a local authentication, where that particular mobile device is connected to a biometric device. So we do the Aadhaar verification. Then the application login, which is a single sign-on login. So these are the 3 factors of authentication we have deployed 2 years back on this setup, the mobile device setup, which is fine. But there are a few challenges, I would definitely bring onto this table. I'm sure that many of my peers and colleagues have implemented this kind of a solution across industries. A typical challenges where we personally went through is, one is on the OTP. We all know a successful OTP takes at least 5 to 8 seconds to get delivered. I'm saying it's a successful OTP. Otherwise, you will end up waiting at least 30 seconds or 40 seconds to get delivered. Depends on the telecom networks, the bandwidth, and all that. Even after you get a successful OTP, there is no guarantee that it has been an SMS phished. Though the telcos have been through the DLP, the distributed ledger technology, to ensure that OTP what we got delivered is safe and all that, but still there are suspicious activities. We don't know the success rate of OTPs. What we got delivered is absolutely verified. So OTP has always been, we were highly dependent on OTP, but it's always a layer which was worrying all of us. 2 is the Aadhaar login. So when I say Aadhaar login, I have peripherals connecting to this particular mobile device, where you have chances of, these are rustic operations, where you have chances of your fingerprints getting corrupted, on your thumbs, and these devices are switching from device to device, your biometric devices, your SSL certificates getting authenticated on these biometric devices, API integrations. There's a lot of, when you depend on Aadhaar, you have a series of compliances to get followed, and with the devices on managing the peripherals as well. 3 is the application login. The traditional IT issues, when you depend highly on the application login, your consumer forgets your passwords. You end up having password resets. We have SLAs and tags to meet to ensure that password reset happens in a stipulated time given. There is a huge load on my help desk, L1, L2, L3. These are the traditional challenges we all go through. Especially in my case, it's a BYOD strategy. I had no choice but had to build this a 3-layer of multi-factor authentication. And I'm not shy away to say that, with these combinations, my mean time of failure is more than 30%. Could be any combination, OTP not getting delivered at the right time, or a biometric faulty device, or could be an application issue. So 30%, which I always see that is a heavy load on my IT development team or support team and infrastructure team, taking care of these challenges on day-to-day basis. And especially, when I say that, the peripherals which are getting connected, I don't know, what kind of attacks may happen on the particular device, because my particular mobile device, have Bluetooth connectors, Wi-Fi connectors. There could be a bluejacking can happen when a data exchange between Bluetooth devices, because my device talks to Bluetooth printers. A war driving or WP attack may happen, for Wi-Fi points, because the device doesn't belong to me. So that particular device may connect to the local Wi-Fi hotspots, or could be any public hotspots. And the smishing, which is very, very popular these days, your particular OTP can be compromised. And also finally, from application point of view, the session handling for me is very, very important. So these are the typical challenges we all go through. I really, we as an IT, we always been into designing the solutions and depending on many factors to ensure that particular transaction runs end to end in a very highly secured way. And this is all what's happening last 2 years. Thanks to Singular Key, who have introduced us to this FIDO integration framework, a passwordless architecture. So we gave a very serious thought to this. So we adopted FIDO architecture to us within a motivation that or objective that we want to do a passwordless integration. So what happens now is we did a lab tested, we did a small POC as well to really challenge ourselves and also FIDO, how successfully this can really help us. So the FIDO integration has been done, the passwordless architecture. And what happens is now, once the consumers, first we register the particular mobile device with the FIDO. When the registration is done, then the mobile device is hard binded with the FIDO framework. So next time when he tries to log in, we skip the multi-factor. He doesn't need to do Aadhaar or OTP or application login. All these three factors are binded together to that particular mobile device with the help of FIDO architecture. This will straight away takes me to the application transaction stream. So this was an absolute breakthrough for us in terms of ROI, or could be a value realization as well. So ROI in terms of people, where I don't need to spend much on the training, very straightforward implementation, or I don't need to spend training for my consumers. That's the biggest advantage of this integration ROI on the people front. Process, again, as I said, it's very easy, where in terms of my designing process to take care of my peripheral management, or could be application management or support management, this process priority will definitely come down. And ROM technology straight away, yes, I can save my penny on the OTPs and on peripherals, again, the biometric devices. So this a perfect ROI can be drawn by adopting FIDO, especially in technology space. So these are the few, I would say, a design which has really a breakthrough kind of a design from FIDO, which really helped us to implement and do a lab test with a perfect result. I would say it's an absolute smooth check-in and smooth checkout. So now with the lab testing successful, we are trying to scale this up to next set of large implementation across our organization, which will really yield benefits at both the business side and technology side as well. So, so this is what I want to share today, on the FIDO successful results, with all of you.
Thanks a lot, Srikanth. Again, a very insightful presentation, and like I said, our audience would definitely gain insights on the implementation aspect, because the industry practitioners' perspective is what really matters in this case, because we have a lot of theoretical understanding that goes around there, but to actually hear from somebody who is implemented this in their business environment. I think that's a key takeaway for our participants here. And with that, I would now sort of make this into a panel discussion, wherein I would request the panelists to sort of have an discourse amongst themselves. And for that, what I would do is I would bring to the fore two questions that, and I'm taking my MC privileges here, and I'm going to put through two different questions to the panel, and the panelists can take it up amongst themselves. So as a security researcher, there are two main concerns that I see being at the peak of discourse today. The first one is with respect to the data privacy scenario, and then is the second one with respect to a situation like a malware or a rootkit attack. So these would be the two scenarios that I would want the panel to have a discussion about, so that our participants can also gain some insights. So I will be unmuting the panelists now, and you can take up these scenarios one after the other.
Okay, since nobody's saying anything, let me say something. On your issue of malware or attacks, let's look at the issue of attacks. Right? And a lot of cryptographic techniques have actually finally at some level, okay, recognized the fact that it is very difficult for software to keep secrets. So at some level, there is a physically secure device, and there is a cryptographic key that's in that device and can't leave it. So there is a theoretical discussion around that, and there's no doubt that that theoretical discussion has its merits. Finally, if can software keep secrets? But the question is, what is it you're trying to protect? Okay? And I remember doing this discussion, many years ago when the BlackBerry was still in vogue. Okay, so the thing is that if somebody found my BlackBerry, they'd try it 3 or 4 times and throw it away. But if it happened to be Obama's BlackBerry, they'd be willing to put in a lot more effort, right? So the question is that the techniques that you use need to be commensurate with sort of value you're protecting. Yeah? If you look at some of the UPI applications today, as far as the user is concerned, it's just a PIN, right? It's a 4, 6-digit PIN. So yes, okay, malware can get in. I mean, malware, we are seeing that is increasingly very sophisticated. End users need convenience. When you download various kinds of apps onto your mobile phone, it needs those permissions. You just give it to them. And that certainly does compromise security. But I think that impact is there for, across the board for all techniques. And I don't think it's specific to the technique. The big thing, for me, the possibility is that a public key cryptography affords you more than just authentication. It allows you to potentially do more, and leveraging those things, each of them give a little bit, better protection. So, if you look back to the old anecdote, you don't have to be, when you 2 or 3 people being pursued by a bear, you don't have to be the world, the world champion in sprinting. You just have to beat the other 2 guys, yeah? And the bear will have his way with them. So, back to David or to Srikanth, whoever.
Sure. Just to build on what you were saying, it was a great sort of lead in that the level of security necessary definitely depends on sort of who you are and what your scenario is. And in recognition of that, FIDO provides or has a certification program for authenticators and it offers in 3 different levels, L1, 2, and 3. L1 assumes a basic level of software protection, you know, a white box cryptography, something like that. Level 2 requires that the keys, the private keys, be actually stored in hardware. That's a requirement, that they be stored in hardware, which means that you've now protected them from various software attacks on the device. And then level 3 is the highest level, where you're actually protecting against hardware attacks themselves. So, you know, most of us, level 1, level 2 are probably sufficient. Level 3, that's what Obama would need. But there's a lot of, if any of you are familiar with the US's NIST 863-3, they've got various guidelines for identity proofing assurance, authentication assurance, and federation assurance. The level 3 of FIDO is similar to the 3rd level of authentication assurance in NIST. So it allows you to choose the right solution for your needs.
Also, just want to add a comment from my side as well. When we do a lot of activities around having a proper security controls in place, especially with the kind of technology, new technology FIDO coming in and trying to solve all your problems. But I use this open forum just to share that do not compromise or neglect your traditional way of, your regulatory technology, and also bypassing or any of the items which has been subscribed by RBI or security practices. I still want to tell you that you need to continue to have a proper security practice in place, ensuring that your mobile applications, your hardware, everything has to run through your red teaming, your threat hunting, have a VAPT score, and have a proper DLP in place, and have a good bit-side score as well to ensure that you're properly there. So all these dots connecting to each other will give you a full proof of security, ensuring that you are safeguarded, both at the people side or the data side or application or infrastructure side. So, but I just want to share a thought on that. Yeah.
Thank you. Again, insightful inputs. And in the meantime, what we were able to get is that we had the audience attention, it seems, throughout the whole session. And I have some questions that I have sent to David. David, the questions have been sent to you. If you have got a chance to have a look, would you want to sort of rephrase them for us and try to answer them as well?
Sure, I was actually just beginning to type them, but this will be much easier. So the first one is, security depends upon a user gesture associated private key. What is the factor to secure the user gesture and to select it? So there's a sort of a series of questions built into the one here. First, the selection mechanism is generally defined by the authenticator or the device that you're using. So for example, on an iOS, the gesture is, on an iPhone, the gesture is going to be Face ID, and on a Mac OS, it's probably going to be Touch ID. On my Windows machine, it uses facial recognition. In some cases, it's just a touch. There's no, it's just proximity when it's plugged in. I have a security key also on my laptop. I just touch it to do it. So the gesture aspect can actually, or is actually dependent on the hardware that you're using. The user registration information, it's not, the authenticator is not, well, let me start over. When you register an authentication key with a service, what happens is that it creates a cryptographic binding between whatever the user ID is that the service provides, the authenticator that you have, and the service itself. So you get a binding of 3 pieces of information that are then that can then be used later during authentication to make sure that you have that same combination of 3 again. And those private keys are the private key for that transaction is generated for each registration that you do. And the private keys are only stored on the authenticator. The private key never leaves the device. So the process for creating the public-private key is what I call the registration. So the first time I want to register my authenticator with a service, the assumption is I'm already logged into the service. I would have my key, the user or the service prompts me, and I either touch the key or it looks at my face, or in some cases I may type in a PIN. That's when the private key gets generated for that service. So there's a unique pair, public-private key pair for each service. So you do need to do the registration uniquely for each service or app that you're using. The security of the key, again, will depend on the authenticator you're using, similar to what I was just describing with the different levels of security. In some cases, the keys are protected by, say, they're stored locally but encrypted by a TPM. So that's one level of protection. The next level of protection is the keys are actually stored in the trusted execution environment or in the secure element. And then the third is it's hardened hardware to protect against it. So but the private key never leaves the authenticator itself, whether it's the laptop or whether it's a roaming authenticator. In case you use multiple applications, yes, you do have to register with each service. You can use the same authenticator across multiple services, though. So I can use one authenticator for my bank, and one for Facebook, and one for GitHub, or I can use multiple authenticators for each one. Typically, though, you often will register 2 authenticators with one service, which helps protect makes it easier for account recovery later. It says, can it be extended for other applications to which the user has access? Only if it's within the same domain. Put it another way, I don't think this is the question, but what does work is if you log into site A through, say I'm using my Chrome browser on my laptop, and then tomorrow I try and log into the same site using my laptop from Edge, then that authenticator is available to both of those browsers. So I would have the authenticator available to do the login on the other browser. So even though I'm using a different browser, I don't have to register a new authenticator because I'm using a different browser. That made sense. I think I answered the questions. And there was also a question that showed up in the Q&A box. It says, if the biometric data is stored, doesn't leave the device, then what happens if the device gets stolen? So biometric data is generally encrypted and stored in the hardware. That's one of the requirements for the biometric certification program that we have. So if your device gets stolen, then you're back to that same problem of someone having to try and crack the hardware to get at it, which is a pretty high bar. Certainly, if it was Obama, someone would certainly try and do that. If it's most of us, that's a high enough bar that certainly they're not going to get enough money out of my bank account to make it worth their while.
Sure. Thanks, David. David, I think we have time for one quick question. The remaining questions, what I would do is we would, we have our communications ID, and I would share them with the experts, and we would put them out on our social media channels, the responses. So here's the question. How do you see an AI like behavioral biometrics working together with FIDO and improving security and reducing frauds? We'll take this question, and then we will close the session for the day.
It's underway already. We're already working with vendors who are having their solutions certified. I'm hedging because I almost want to say we've already certified somebody, but I can't say for certain. But I know that there are behavioral biometric companies that are looking to get FIDO certified. So it's coming.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. So we are very much keeping in time, and I believe that we have also been able to look at the questions that had been posed by the audience. While I still do, see some questions regarding costs and questions regarding implementation, what I would request is, if the speakers would also find it appropriate is that we could probably have a written kind of a Q&A that I would then post on the Revit website, and we would make sure that I've already made a note of all the questions that have come in, so we would make sure that they are answered in one way or the other, either over here or on another platform. But considering that we have timelines, what I'm going to do is I'm going to request Sanjay Jain, the Revit head for security engineering, who's part of our cybersecurity vertical, to sort of sum up the key insights from today's session and express a quick vote of thanks. So Sanjay, allow me to unmute you in a moment, and then you can proceed. Sanjay, over to you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Ranjit, for allowing me the opportunity to summarize the key insights of this session. So undoubtedly, the session was so interesting, and our all the three speakers have given us so much of insight about the grooming problem, which is going to be a lot big in the coming time to come. And when I say that it could be a very serious problem, it can be well understood by the considering the fact that the digital payments in India is expected to grow over threefold. And what it means in terms of the money is going to hit a transaction of rupees 7,000 trillion by year 2025. So currently, if we see, we are around 2,100 million digital payment transactions are happening. If we convert this in terms of the number of unique mobile payment users, then today we have 160 million unique mobile payment users who are using the digital payment. And research says that by year 2025, it will grow to the 800 million unique users. So this gives us a perspective that how much important was the today's topic in terms of the security and the one of the greatest challenge I will say on the table of the CISOs of all the technology companies and the financial organizations, because this digital payment is the way to go. There is no alternative. So with this, for me, the key takeaway from the session was like the Dr. Sandeep Oberoi sir, he clearly called out the even though the OTP, the current SMS-based OTP is very convenient and kind of user-friendly, but how it could be vulnerable with the simple security vulnerabilities such as that the mobile apps which we use to authenticate this OTP also have got the permission to access the SMS, and thus it can become the vulnerable. The phishing, the traditional, we can say the phishing, SMS phishing attack is one of the major security vulnerability. So these are some of the vulnerabilities which are making the SMS OTP more vulnerable in times to come. I am really amazed with the solution which which David Turner has come out from the FIDO and the FIDO authenticator. And the best thing is like it is based on the public key cryptography, and which has got the basic mechanism of public key and private key cryptography. And if you see the public key cryptography, the fundamental concept is the private key, and the private key remains with the user who has generated this, and it is never live from the user device who has generated that. And that's where the security of the public, any solution which is based on the public key cryptography makes it that much stronger and less vulnerable to the various cyber security attacks. And lastly, the business perspective, which was given by the Shrikant Tapanna, the real-time business use case, that was really very insightful. In fact, he went ahead and explained the complete architecture about how the FIDO authenticators can be integrated with the real-time web applications, business applications, and what is the benefits we achieve. So thumbs up for the same. With this, I formally would like to thank all our three speakers, Dr. Sandeep Uberai, Mr. David Turner, and Mr. Shrikant Tapanna. Lastly, I would also like to thank the wonderful audience for sparing their time from their busy schedule on a working day, and also raising the queries which are today's real concerns related with the SMS-based OTP. So thank you very much, and over to you, Ranjit.
Thanks, Sanjay. Thanks for summing it up. I think there's very little left for me to close with. Once again, thank you, everyone. Like I said, two things. One is that the recording of this entire session will be uploaded on the Revit website. And since I have got a lot of follow-up questions as well, what I've done is I have sort of copied them over, and we will be sharing these with our experts. So the responses will also be shared either as a document or as something that can be shared around on the website itself. So once again, thank you everyone for coming. Thank you, speakers, and I will now close this session. Thank you. Thanks a lot.